guys, it's Sam, and this is my April and May wrap up. So if you guys didn't notice, I did take a little social media break. If you're wondering where I was or what that means or what the future of my content is, basically don't worry, I'm not leaving YouTube, but I needed a break because of burnout and things. So if you want more information about that, I did a live stream. I put little like chapters in there so you can skip around to different topics I talk about. I just didn't want to devote a full video to that. So you can check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, if you're just here for the books, we're going to talk about those now. Since this was a 2-month long wrap up, I mean, I've read like 10 books, but some of these were a while ago, and most of these I've also done reviews for, at least some of the ones in April, so I have full videos for that you can go and check out and get more of my in-depth thoughts there. So we're going to try to rapid fire these a little bit, because I'm just kind of playing catch up a little bit. But I want to talk about some of the books that I read, so let's get into it. First was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is a, I think it would be considered adult. Maybe it's sort of a new adult, but it's a romantasy kind of book that's very popular on TikTok, or at least was when we were talking about this, and we end up reading it for the House Salt Book Club pick for that month. So there's a full discussion video, all of us talking about it here on my channel. I will link it on the screen for more of my in-depth thoughts. But it's essentially a human girl is raised by a vampire king. And there's this competition happening where she can basically get like a ton of powers, but mostly all these vampires are competing. She enters this competition, you know, odds are all against her, and ends up having to team up with another vampire who's sort of a rival in this competition, and things are figured out and everything goes from there. This was fine. This has been advertised as like pretty good for fans of Sarah J. Maas, and I totally understand why. Like a lot of the same sort of writing beats, a lot of the same weaker world building, but parts that you sort of enjoy. Like this was just fine for me. I didn't hate it. Very forgettable. I've forgotten. I don't know the main characters' names. I don't know anything. It is a duology that I do think I might continue. I'm very torn. I feel like if I don't continue it soon, I might not. The parts I didn't really like were some of the reveals that happened at the end. Should almost have been revealed sooner. I guess they couldn't have because of shock value, but there's so many things that seem so kind of nonsensical about the plot that then get sort of revealed later to be like, it all makes sense. But it's like, if you're reading like 600 pages of book to get to the point where it makes sense, I still feel like it doesn't make sense. And I'm kind of getting over these like competition books. I'll talk about that more because there's another one I read in here. I'm getting over magical competition or any kind of competition. I don't really like a competition book. It's not my favorite. So that was also like a weaker point. But some of the characters were kind of like enjoyable. The romance in there was like, I guess it could have been slower burn than it was. Anything can always be a slower burn than it is, honestly. But it's fine. And if you want this flavor of like romantasy, kind of angsty, whatever, I love a vampire story. There's parts of the world building that I'm like, that could be slightly intriguing. Like this was just fine. This was a 3-star for me. And I read The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri. This is the second book in the, is it Burning Kingdoms? Is that, yeah, Burning Kingdoms, look at me. Burning Kingdoms series, which is a adult fantasy series. I believe I did a full review for this as well, I want to say, because I didn't start my little break from social media until May. So I read this earlier in April and did a review, I'm pretty sure. So I will link on the screen. Can't talk about this much because this is the second book in the series, but this is a multiple POV story following primarily 2 women in this world, sort of on opposite sides of this like political machinations-y type thing. Different types of magic in here, some like nature magic specifically, but all different kinds of magic and different like sort of own world gods and things that are really fun. There's a sapphic relationship, and this is just good. So this was a continuation. This had a little bit of like that second book feeling that they were like moving pieces around to get them to certain places to like have the big buildup of whatever the third book is going to be. But I didn't find that boring. I still found that really interesting. There's still some reveals and progressions that happen that are interesting. I wouldn't say, oh man, I'm trying to remember. I wouldn't say that like there's drastic character arc things happening here. It's all a lot of buildup, but I didn't find the buildup to be boring or off-putting or anything like that. Like this is a very sweeping epic scale story, so there are a lot of things that have to happen there. So I still enjoyed this, gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This was a ton of fun. This is one that like the plot of this I'm still thinking about, even though I didn't rate it like super high as one of my favorites of like the year, like you would think with like a 4 or 5 star book. Maybe it is more of a 4 in that case though. This has been one of my favorite books that I have read this year thus far though, and that's why 3-star books, spoiler, this is gonna be a 3-star for me, can still be great. This is taking place, like, honestly during the pandemic, like during the quarantine part of the pandemic, where this guy who lost his job at like a tech startup kind of place ends up getting a job at the Kaiju Preservation Society, where it's just like this top secret organization that is like a government organization that has discovered an alternate universe, like an alternate Earth. There's like alternate realities and things. And in that version of Earth, there are Kaiju, which is like Godzilla type creatures, right? Like these big behemoth creatures. And, you know, atomic powers and things like that. And they can create, and any kind of like atomic energy can create these like rifts in between the different realities. And so that's how they kind of discovered it. And now they're there to preserve it, make sure they don't come through, destroy all of us, we don't destroy all of them, all of that. So he goes and he works at this place. This is so fun. It's short. It's, there's a little bit too much for me, and that's why it's not ranked as high as it could be. There's a little bit too much present references. Like, I just don't like a book that references too much of like current day, and there's just a lot of these like pop culture references or references to like COVID. He's writing this during COVID-19, like during the peak of it. So like I get that. There's a little bit too much of that, a little bit too much of like some of these little like jokey jokes. But ultimately this was just like so fun because it's just like, yeah, this is the story of a dude working like a job where he's like basically a zoologist for kaiju, except for they're not trapped anywhere. Like they're just on their planet and they're just scientists like checking stuff out. He's not even a scientist. He's just a guy that moves things. Like he's their muscle. Like, it's just fun. So if you're into kaiju or, you know, Pacific Rim, Godzilla, any of that, I'm not particularly, but like if you like a cool sci-fi creature situation, anything with aliens, I don't know, any of that, fun. And John Scalzi knows how to write like a fun time. So I really enjoyed this. I would say I gave it like a 3, like in the 3-star range. I would say it's still in the 3-star. Like this is not outstanding, but it did what it needed to do. And it was sort of cotton candy fun. The stakes were never super high. I don't know, like a 3.75, I'd say. Then I read The Anthropocene reviewed by John Green, and this is one of those books that a lot of people talked about when this first came out. I think it came out in 2020? No, 2021. I don't remember. But this is a series of nonfiction, like sort of short stories, essays, compiled, just talking about our present day, kind of the Anthropocene. That's like our current time and, you know, reality in time. Just like, you know, the Jurassic period, whatever. We're in the Anthropocene. So this is John Green's talking about random shit, really, and giving it a rating. He is rating current culture, kind of. And it's all random stuff. Like, one that sticks out in my mind is he reviews Diet Dr. Pepper. And, like, we'll talk about the history of it. And then he also will tie things into each other. And, like, he'll reference something from another story over here. He reviews Canadian geese at one point. He reviews bad things and good things. Like, it's magical. And he reads the audiobook, which I tend to really like when nonfiction authors, memoirs, things like that, when they read their own audiobook, and he does. And if you're familiar with John Green, you recognize his voice. It works really well. I'm not like a John Green super fan, but I enjoy him and Hank and like what they've done for sort of internet culture. And like this is so delightful. It's great. I actually, as I was reading it, I called my dad and I was like, you should like read this because there's a lot of like history that he ties in. He just does a great job. So if you just are interested in maybe doing a nonfiction, I think anyone could find something to enjoy in this. It's good. It's good. It's one of my favorite books I've read this year. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read the Book of Tea duology, I think is the name of this. So it's A Magic Steeped in Poison and A Venom Dark and Sweet. That is it. By Judy I. Lin. This is a YA fantasy duology that takes place in, I would say it's like an imperial Japan. Basically, this girl ends up going to the capital to be in a competition to be one of the sort of like tea magicians in this world. Like this is sort of this like, there's magic through tea, and people who have certain abilities can use tea and flavors of tea and things to kind of do magic, whether that is evoking a certain kind of emotion, mind reading, like telekinesis type stuff. Like they can do stuff with magic. And something happens where like her mother ended up being killed by some kind of poisonous tea, and she wants to discover like what happened there, but she also wants to go to the capital to potentially save her sister who's dying from the same poison, just more slowly, and ends up like figuring out kind of like what's going on with this world, this capital, whatever. This is a great series to just read back to back, and both books are a little bit different in like sort of plot. Like this first one has this competition element, which again, I'm kind of sick of competition, so that is not something I wasn't really into, but has more of the tea magic elements. The second book is more of this like quest plot and has less of the magic. So they evened each other out, to both be enjoyable for different reasons. And ultimately, it's still just like a 3-star series for me. Like, I'm going to find this again pretty forgettable. But it's a solid YA series. It's like, it's right there in the middle. That's like pretty decent. If you want something that's, again, a little bit different, this like tea magic is really cool. I wish the tea magic would have been like utilized a little bit more. But yeah, like just a solid YA duology with some tropes that are like recognizable and enjoyable and things, and this like new element of this tea magic. So I enjoyed this. 3-star series for me. I then read The Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake. This is the second book in the Atlas 6. I mean, I don't even know like the name of the series, but the Atlas 6 was the first book. This is a adult sci-fi-ish, fantasy-ish. It's a bunch of magicians basically who have, in the first book, they get recruited by this mysterious guy who's a part of this mysterious organization which apparently protected the Library of Alexandria and all of its contents. So they recruit 6 people to be a part of this society and be initiated, but one of them will not be, and so they're sort of competing-ish. It's not really competition though. This is very sort of like dark fantasy academia type stuff, and it's really just like following their lives through to the initiation and everything. This is following that book, so I can't talk about much. But this one I liked a little bit more than the first book. So the first book has some like fairly pretentious writing that can really bog it down. And I did a review for the first book, so I'll link that on the screen. This one still has that, but because it got in the hands of an editor, because that book was originally self-published, this one got in the hands of an editor before it got out, so I think that helped it. It's still a lot of meandering. It's still a lot of second book stuff. It's still a lot of not a lot happening and things just kind of like lining up, and a lot of just like character interaction stuff. With Dark Academia, it's a lot of like character relationships and things, usually with people who are all bad people, and that's kind of how this book is. It was fine. I gave this 3 stars. I will probably finish out the series. Like, it's intriguing enough for me. I don't feel like I need to reread the book before the new release to like read it. So like, it doesn't take up a lot of time for me. And it does some interesting things with like the academic, like magical academic discussions that it's having. But I don't think that it's this like work of art that some people think that it is, because the first book got so much hype. I didn't really hear a ton about the second book, honestly. So I didn't really know what to expect going into this anyway, but it's fine. It's interesting enough. I will probably continue. 3 stars. I then listened to Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is the first book in the Southern Reach trilogy, which is a pretty popular like trilogy now because it's this like, I don't even know what you would call it. It's sci-fi, but it's like weird. It's this new weird genre that Jeff Vandermeer does, and I really liked his book Born, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And this is what inspired the movie Annihilation. The movie Annihilation is not a direct adaptation of this. It's just supposed to be inspired by the vibes of this. So this is a story where we're following, no one has a name. They're just named by their like title of what they are. A bunch of scientists go into this area that they call the Southern Reach to kind of investigate what's going on. They get sent on these missions, and everything slowly falls apart because this is an area that's basically been contaminated by an alien presence. You're still not really, like, I'm on book 2 and I don't know what's really going on there. But like, something is changing the landscape, changing the people, devastation surrounds, and it's just this like eerie just sense of discontent the entire time. And I read this on audiobook. That definitely added to it. It wasn't, I'm conflicted because I really like parts of just like the world and just how like weird this was and just the mystery of it all. But what I really loved about Born was much more of like character study, slice of lifey new weird with like biotech and all this cool. I love Born. Born's a great book. This was just like fine to me. It didn't really have those like character things where I cared about the characters. So ended up being like a 3 star to me. I really want to watch the movie now because I have heard great things about the movie. I am currently reading the second book in the series. I'm not like super hooked, but I'm still like intrigued enough. I don't know. It's not audio, so I just can kind of fly through these, but this one was a 3 star for me. Then I read Narcissus in Chains by Laurel K. Hamilton, which is the, I believe, 10th book in the series. Here's the thing. I'm rereading the series. I think I accidentally skipped a book. Am I going to go back though? I don't know, because I have read this series numerous times in my life, and I'm just rereading all of them to catch up. This is a currently ongoing urban fantasy paranormal romance series. And the 10th book is where it really starts to go in a different direction. So I had forgotten exactly what book this happens in. I know that it happens, but basically this is a series following a sort of paranormal investigator, vampire hunter, necromancer. She raises zombies for a living. And as the books go on, she gets more and more tied into relationships with different paranormal men. She basically, this is like one of the first reverse harem books eventually, but it starts out as more of like supernatural police procedural monster of the week, and gets more and more into this like meta plot of what's going on with all her relationships, which I don't mind. But this book was like 600 pages with a lot of sex. It goes more erotica, a lot of like sex and relationship stuff, which ties into the magic and ties into abilities, but it's just like a lot. So I started to get very just like a little bored in this one. I still give it like 3 stars because one of my favorite characters pops up in this. But I think this is where it's going to start getting like, okay, enough. But if I want to read something spicy, listening to one of these on audio is like totally fine. Although I don't think my library has like a lot of the rest of these, maybe because they turn into erotica. Maybe they can't have porn on the shelves. But I feel like they don't have a lot of the audiobooks for the rest of these. So I might need to request those because I really don't want to physically read them. But I heard that once you get past like book, I don't know, like 17 or something, it starts to kind of go back to how it used to be. I don't know. It's a lot of relationship drama. It's a lot of like sort of, again, like reverse harem-y, polyamory relationship stuff. Like she has all these really hot men who are like obsessed with her. And she has magical abilities, and like her vagina is magic. I don't know. Like it's kind of fun. It can be fun when you want a little break. But I think now from here on out, I will just read these a little bit more sporadically, and I will be going for other books for my like urban fantasy, like Monster of the Week stuff, like the Kate Daniels series and everything. But this is like, yeah, between like a 2 and a 3 star. Probably a 3 because one of my favorite guys shows up in this one. So, and the last book that I read last month was Finley, Donovan is Killing It by oh shoot, I didn't write her name down. Casamina. I can't even get to my computer because it's far over there. Anyway, this book. This was our House Up Book Club pick for last month, so there's a full live show talking about this. But this is essentially a cozy thriller. So it's following a woman who is a writer of romantic suspense. She is struggling to write her book, and she's talking to her agent in a Panera, and someone overhears thinking that she's talking about being like basically a hit woman, and hires her to kill her like very awful husband. And she's like, do I do it? Whatever. Like, it's money. What happened? And she gets like tied into this whole thing and like a murder plot and everything. I'm not a big thriller person. I haven't read a ton of thrillers. This is also not quite a thriller because it's like lower stakes. Basically, we talked about this in the live show. This has these like romance elements that if I felt like would have been built up a little bit more, that almost would have been fun, like more fun for me. I had a really hard time suspending my disbelief. She did so many dumb things. My sense of justice like couldn't quite abide with it. It was like not bad, but it wasn't anything like super great or memorable or anything. And it was just like fine. It's apparently a series I'm not going to continue. I gave this like a 2 star, maybe 2.5 maybe. Like it's fine. It's mid. It's just in between. I'm interested to possibly read some more thrillers, or even like people have said romantic suspense, to see if I would like that more. Because this was just like not necessarily it, but it's okay. It like didn't make me mad or anything. So that is it for the books that I read the last 2 months. So comment below, let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And yeah, like I said, my other video talks about like the future of my content and stuff, but Cliff Notes version is you will still see wrap-ups and goal videos and things like that, but you'll also see a lot more longer form content coming from me. Just maybe not as often because it takes longer to film longer form content. So yeah, but more details of that in the live stream. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.